Hello and welcome to the LGBTQ Northwest Indiana and PFLAG Crown Point TV. Your hosts today are Mara Victoria and Elizabeth Menning. Welcome to your own show, and today I'm going to just turn it over to you because I think you have a pretty full schedule. You have some neat things that you want to share with us, and so we'll get started.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I'll be here if you need me.
Okay. Welcome to LGBTQ Northwest Indiana and PFLAG Crown Point NWI TV.
We come to you every 2 weeks, currently on Thursdays at or around 11 a.m. Central.
And the show is produced by the Bill and Callie Show. Thank you for your support and also the support of your sponsors.
Yes, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Menning. I go by she, her, and hers.
And I am Amari Victoria. I also go by she, her, hers.
So we, as always with our content, we're going to bring you topics and news important to the LGBTQ and ally community members here in Northwest Indiana. So whether you identify yourself as LGBTQ, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, whether you consider yourself an ally, if you know somebody who is LGBTQ, or you or somebody you know wants to learn how to be an ally, this show is for you.
Today's content will include some news highlights,
information on registering to vote this year in the election.
we'll talk about the Indiana smoking cessation quit line.
I'll dive into one, maybe two feature topics. Primary one is on identity labels, kind of our in-depth wrap-up session on that topic.
Yes. Also, we're going to dive into the gender expression topic as well.
As time allows. All right, and then any regional announcements and resource highlights. And I think that's probably what we're...
Yep, I think that's it.
So, Mari, you want to dive into the news?
Okay, let's go. We've got some stories from around the country and a story from around the world. First one is a transgender man was named Michigan Teacher of the Year. The state of Michigan has honored a transgender educator as Teacher of the Year. The Michigan Department of Education announced at a virtual meeting on Friday that Owen Bandano is Michigan's Teacher of the Year. He teaches 9th grade language arts at Oak Park High School near Detroit. Bandano said that his perspective as a transgender and queer man has helped him help students feel safe in school. Bandano said that his primary concern is for students, including his LGBTQ students. Jamie Hitchcock, the superintendent of Oak Park Schools, said, "I can say without a doubt that Owen has dedicated himself. He doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk every single day to ensure that equity and justice is served. Every time he walks into the classroom, it has an impact on the students he teaches." Bandano is now in the running for National Teacher of the Year.
That is so important because kids don't typically get enough support in the school system. So kudos to him.
And kudos to educators in general. I think their value is much higher than many people think. And certainly the people paying them don't value their services to our children.
I think with all the stay at home, I think parents are beginning to realize just how much the educators do for their kids.
It'll be an interesting start to this upcoming school year.
Yep.
Our second story, parents can declare their newborns non-binary on their birth certificates in Maine. Starting this past July 14th, International Non-Binary Peoples Day, people in Maine can get a birth certificate issued with an X instead of an M or F as their gender. According to an FAQ issued by the governor's office, adults and emancipated minors can apply for a non-binary marker on the birth certificate by submitting an application and an individual notarized affirmation that the change is made to align the record with their gender identity. Parents can fill out a form for their minor children if they submit a declaration of a licensed physician or mental health care provider who affirms that the requested gender is consistent with the minor's gender identity. And parents can choose the non-binary option on their child's birth certificate at birth and update it later if needed. Several other states, including New York, California, and Colorado, also allow for non-binary gender markers on birth certificates.
It's pretty amazing that parents can do that for their kids. That's like a move in the right direction.
It's definitely moving in the right direction. At least in that case, it's no longer just a binary, male or female.
Right. You're not locking a kid into some.
That's right, which is probably the most important. Do you want to read?
Nope.
Okay. Story number 3. Alaska town passes LGBTQ protections after local business refuses to serve gays. Located on the state's southern coast, Ketchikan, Alaska, the state's first city, has a thriving tourism industry, and locals know that discrimination is bad for business. When a local florist reportedly refused to provide flowers for same-sex couples, residents quickly reacted. An ordinance prohibiting discrimination against LGBTQ people passed unanimously in the city council earlier this month after local florist Heather Dolan, owner of Heavenly Creations, made news for allegedly refusing to take an order for a same-sex wedding. The city's new ordinance prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. It will take effect next month.
That's great.
Our next story, Arizona County ends anti-gay and lesbian adoption rule to save money. This is an interesting one. A 5-year-old rule put in place in Arizona to make it harder for same-sex couples to adopt has just been overturned by the new county attorney. In 2015, not 2015, just after a court legalized marriage equality in Arizona, former Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery tried to block same-sex couples from getting pre-adoption legal services, which his office offers to opposite-sex couples. The ACLU of Arizona pushed back against his anti-LGBTQ policy. Montgomery was appointed to the state Supreme Court last year and was replaced by County Attorney Alistair Adele, who reversed the rule. She said that reversing Montgomery's policy will save the county $750,000 a year. Adele said, once we realized how much money we were saving, not only for taxpayers, but getting children out of the system and into loving homes, this was something we absolutely had to do. Nice. Yes, it is good news. Perhaps the war is won by winning minor battles everywhere. And from around the world, Thailand moves to legalize same-sex unions, a rare step in Asia. In a country that has long been a rare bastion in Asia for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, Thailand said on Wednesday that it had approved a draft bill that would give same-sex unions many of the same benefits as those of heterosexual marriages. The bill avoids the term marriage, but allows for the legal registration of same-sex partnerships. Accompanying amendments to the Civil Code would give couples the right to jointly own property, adopt children, and pass on inheritances. While the bill still needs to be passed by Parliament to become law, social activists say that the biggest hurdle was approved by Thailand's cabinet, which is a stronghold of retired military generals and tradition-bound political elders. Although some elements of the Buddhist-dominated culture in Thailand are socially conservative, the country is also one of the most open places in the world for LGBTQ people. Thai surgeons have been pioneers in gender reassignment surgery, and hit soap operas chronicle gay relationships. 4 transgender people were elected to Parliament last year. If the Civil Partnership Bill is approved by Parliament, Thailand will join Taiwan as the only places in Asia that provide elements of legal equality for same-sex couples.
Very good.
And that's it.
All right, thanks, Amari. So a couple of things that we like to remind you about. One is the upcoming general election and how important it is for everybody to register to vote before the deadlines and then go out and vote. Or hopefully we'll have the mail-in voting option. So if you go to www.indianavoters.com, you will be able to do just about everything. You can submit your new registration, update your old registration, check your status, find your polling location, find county contact information, and learn who's on your ballot. So that's a really important thing. Bill, I know you've been covering voting, and you had Rise NWI on not too long ago. Do you have any words to add about the voting initiative?
No, it's just as we move closer to the election day, we are going to have Rise on again.
Okay.
So that we'll continually keep voters updated, particularly with mail-in votings, being that there's an elected official feels that they are fraudulent. We want to assure people that they truly are not. So there's going to be ways, various different ways that we're going to keep people informed through our show with partnership with Rise on the various different ways. And if there are any changes to the voting methodology, as in change in dates, if we do have what they refer to as the second wave, and I'm making air quotation marks. So if that does happen, we want to inform people what that's going to look like. So as like this past primary, people are not shocked when they hear that the date has changed or polling places could possibly change. Our total goal is to just keep people informed, which is the mission of Rise in Lake County. But we speak to, as you know, many counties everywhere. So we hope what we educate people about translates everywhere. So that's it.
That's great.
I'd like to mention that on a countrywide level, of course, there are some things that would be nice to have, and that one would be approval for mail-in voting for every person in every state in the country, but also that we still have a postal service come November. And I urge people to support the saving, so to speak, of our United States Postal Service so as to make voting simpler, cheaper, faster, and actually better
And safer.
and safer.
Right. Okay. So another plug we like to make is for the 1-800-QUIT-NOW. As you know, because of the non-acceptance or the typical non-acceptance and other issues surrounding LGBTQ people, they're often more prone to smoking or abuse of tobacco, vaping, that type of thing. And Indiana has a free program, the 1-800-QUIT-NOW, that will help you in your smoking and vaping cessation efforts.
And I know we showed the audience last week this document by holding it up, but I'm going to try some new technology here today and try to share my screen with that. Here's to be working. Excellent. So you can see that this is a whole page, and I'm only showing the top of it, but you can see the quit line hours, the quit line number, supported languages, and you can see the button there that you can actually enroll in online secession services. And down below is actually a list of all the services that are available in Indiana.
Which are pretty robust. So we encourage you to check it out. Take your move to be healthier.
Indeed.
All right, I think it is time for our first feature topic, which is identity labels. Amari?
Okay. So I decided that this was going to be the last show that we talk about labels, at least for a while, because we have drawn that out, and it's been good conversation and good information.
So we have so many other topics we want to bring up.
We really haven't concentrated very hard on actually trying to define the terms for people. So I would like to start out by a short English lesson, and it's helpful to know these things because these are parts of the words that are the labels that people use in the LGBTQ community. For example, I'm sure we've all heard of the combining form word hetero, like in heterosexual. That has a meaning of different or other. And the opposite of that, of course, would be the prefix homo, which is a combining form meaning the same. I have this silly example of homo being used in a word that's actually acceptable, as homosexual is no longer, it's considered to be derogatory. And that is homogenized.
I was just going to say.
Everyone who's ever bought milk has probably seen it on the label that milk is homogenized. And what that means is that there's a process done to take the inconsistent raw milk and make it into something very, very consistent or homogenized. The prefix inter, it's a prefix meaning between, among, or in the midst of. You want to do it, Bill?
Sure. All right. Binary means consisting of, indicating, or involving two. It derives from Middle English to Late Latin.
It is the word that we would normally use for gender or sex, the gender binary, the sex binary, male and female, man and woman. And we all know that it's not really a binary, but the word definition is there.
Cis is a prefix meaning on the same side of, and it refers to the alignment of one's gender identity with one's biological sex assigned at birth. So you might hear this in words cisgender, cisexual. Again, it derives from Latin.
Go ahead.
All right, one more. Trans. This is a prefix meaning on the other side of, referring to the misalignment of one's gender identity with one's biological sex assigned at birth. Again, Latin.
Bi is the next combining form, and that means twice or two. It's really important, though, that we understand that bi, in the sense of a person who's bisexual, doesn't necessarily mean that they are attracted to the binary sexes, male and female, or that it is two predefined sexes. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. Then there's the term pan or omni, which is a combining form meaning all. Two other combining forms that describe our relationship orientations, or used in words that describe that, are mono, which is a combining form meaning alone, single, or one, as in monogamy. And poly, a combining form with the meanings of much, many. As an adjective, it is also noting and relating to polyamory or being polyamorous. Would you like to do some more? Okay.
All right, the next one is demi, which is a combining form or prefix meaning half or lesser. So you may have heard the words demi-lune or demi-tasse. It indicates, in our context, it indicates a partial identification with a specific gender.
Now, there are some other words that are not included in the words that we're going to define for you, the labels we're going to define, that I broke out, and Elizabeth is going to read a couple of them here.
Okay, so one of the words is scoliosexual. This represents somebody who is sexually attracted to people who identify with a non-binary gender. I think it's more than just sexually too, right? It's romantically and aesthetically.
Highly likely, yes.
Yeah, emotionally.
Those are usually tied together.
Mm-hmm. Everything is so interrelated, the terms and the concepts, because as you know, people are pretty complicated.
The next one is called gray A. Gray A or gray asexuality refers to sexual identities along the spectrum of asexuality and sexuality. Those who identify as gray A experience sexual attraction or desire sex only rarely or under certain conditions. People of a variety of gender identities can be gray A.
All right. Two-spirit, you may have heard that word. In some Native American tribes, a person, especially a biological male, who adopts the gender identity, dress, and social roles traditionally assigned to the opposite sex. It could mean a person who adopts some combination of male and female gender identity, dress, and social roles, or who identifies as gay, lesbian, transgender, etc. And culturally distinct gender apart from the male and female gender. And these people were not ostracized, they were actually revered. Oh boy.
Okay. The next word is androgynous. And I just have some examples of what that would mean. Being both male and female. There's a out of vogue word, hermaphroditic, that also describes being both male and female, or intersex is the more modern term. Having both masculine and female feminine characteristics, having an ambiguous sexual identity, or neither clearly masculine nor clearly feminine in appearance. I'd also like to talk about the antonyms. Those are words that are opposite other words.
I have a quick question though.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned intersex in terms of androgynous, but that doesn't follow.
The basically the secondary sex characteristics of an intersex person aren't necessarily strictly male or female.
Okay, got it. All right, antonyms.
So the definition of antonym is a word that means the opposite of another word. And it's generality that I'd like to bring up, because there are some words in the vocabulary that actually use that a prefix to indicate the opposite of.
Like you already talked about, the gray A. Right?
No, the A in that case stands for asexuality.
And A.
The A in this case, asexuality, yes. We like to have fun on this show.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway,
carry on.
Okay, so examples would be, if you identify as a specific gender, the word would be gender, and that means you have a gender. If you do not identify as a specific gender, the word is agender. So the A prefix has been added onto the word gender. And likewise, someone who identifies as being romantic would be called romantic. Someone who does not identify as being romantic would be called aromantic.
So are we going to get into a little bit about agender versus non-binary? Can you talk about non-binary later?
Yes.
Okay.
And the last example is someone who identifies with sexuality. The word would be sexual. And someone who identifies without a sexuality, the word would be asexual. I'd like to actually talk about one more topic that in some ways is near and dear to my own heart, but it uses that I won't say prefix, it's a combining word or word. It's polyamory. I'd like to just define that for people so that they can get an idea that polyamory is not the same as polygamy, and that in today's world, there's actually a larger than you would think percentage of people who actually are polyamorous. Polyamory is the practice of or desire for intimate relationships with more than one partner, with the informed consent of all partners involved. It has been described as consensual, ethical, and responsible non-monogamy. People who identify as polyamorous believe in an open relationship with a conscious management of jealousy. They reject the view that sexual and relational exclusivity are necessary for deep, committed, long-term loving relationships. In some ways, polyamory has become an umbrella term for various forms of non-monogamous multi-partner relationships or non-exclusive sexual or romantic relationships. It has recurring themes or values such as love, intimacy, honesty, integrity, equality, communication, and commitment.
And the communication is a huge, huge part of that.
It may very well be the biggest part of polyamory. An example, imagine how difficult it is for Elizabeth and myself to get our schedules together to do anything.
Have a date night.
Imagine having multiple partners and having to schedule with all of them.
And I think it's important to mention that just because some people might identify as polyamorous doesn't mean that's the answer for everybody. Some people truly hold to monogamy as their value. That's okay too. That doesn't hold for everybody.
Like we would have everyone come to the conclusion that being on a spectrum for your gender identity, your sexual orientation, also your relationship orientation, it's more than just monogamy. Society has taught us that it's only monogamy, but that isn't really the case. So finally, we make it to the labels. And we're going to go through these.
All right.
And define them for you nonstop so that we can get through this topic. And please feel free to contact us if you have any questions, or I can give you some sources offline where you can find as much information as you would like.
There's a wealth of good information out there, and as you know, some bad information. So we'd be happy to direct you to some good places.
In researching this, I did go to multiple places because at this point, I know that different people have slightly different definitions of these same labels.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these will likely have more than one definition that will be read off to sort of capture those nuances.
It's like different facets of a crystal.
First term, agender, and as we know, that is someone who identifies without. But let's see what the definitions are. People who commonly do not have a gender and or have a gender that they describe as neutral. A person who does not identify with any gender or intentionally doesn't follow expectations of gender. Or someone who has little or no personal connection with gender.
All right, next is aromantic. This talks about the lack of romantic attraction and one identifying with this orientation.
The next term is asexual, which means the lack of sexual attraction or desire for other people. People who do not experience sexual attraction, or someone who experiences attraction but doesn't feel the need to act out that attraction sexually.
All right, bigender. This refers to those who identify as two genders. It should not be confused with two-spirit, which is specifically associated with Native American and First Nations cultures. It also is defined as someone who identifies with two distinct genders, such as man-woman or woman-androgyne.
Oh, you want to do the next one too? Binary?
You bet. It's got my name right next to it. So
Yes, it does.
We assign these to ourselves so we can split it up here. So binary, I do not know what these letters mean.
Gender expression, gender identity.
Got it. Sexuality,
and sexual orientation.
So it's a suffix binary or a noun, that the belief that such things as gender identity have only two distinct, opposite, and disconnected forms. So I guess you're going to get to the rest of this here.
Okay, next term is bisexual. Person emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender, or gender identity, though not necessarily simultaneously, and in the same way or to the same degree. It also means the capacity to form enduring physical, romantic, and/or emotional attractions to those of the same gender or to those of another gender. Another meaning, I thought there was one more. Anyway, I have two others, which I haven't highlighted anything, so there was no information that I was going to read. But of those four definitions for bisexual, I did, as I read through them, make a comment. And that comment is that two of the four definitions imply that a bisexual person's attraction is to exactly two genders, while the other ones don't. And that's important because bisexual people themselves define bisexual and their bisexuality in a variety of ways. And one should never assume that one's is someone else's.
Right. So I might be getting ahead of ourselves here, but for instance, bisexual was a popular term back when, and not pansexual, but now people are more and more using the term pansexual. But they can overlap. They could mean the same thing. They can mean different things depending on the person.
Okay.
All right. So cisgender. Oh, I wonder why you handed me that one. I am cisgender. A term used to describe a person whose gender identity aligns with those typically associated. My gender identity aligns with the sex assigned to me at birth. So another definition is a cisgender or cis person is not transgender. Cisgender does not indicate biology, gender expression, or sexuality or sexual orientation. So one would differentiate between women who are trans and women who aren't by saying trans women and cis women. A more widely understood way to describe people who are not transgender is simply to say non-transgender people. And finally, a term.
This was a really interesting last definition of cisgender.
A term used to call attention to the privilege of people who are not transgender.
The implication there, of course, being that cisgender people have privilege. Or at least that's the way I took it. Mm-hmm. The next term is Demi-Romantic. People who do not experience romantic attraction until a strong emotional or sexual connection is formed with a partner.
All right.
And likewise, demisexual. People on the asexual spectrum who do experience some sexual attraction, but only in certain situations, like after they formed a strong emotional or romantic connection with a partner.
Right. Gay. A person who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to members of the same gender. Mm-hmm. All right.
The next term is gender fluid. A person who does not identify with a single fixed gender. A gender fluid person doesn't confine themselves to one gender or even a few. Instead, they may fluctuate between presenting as feminine, masculine, neither, or both. Someone whose gender identity and or expression varies over time. And you have that, and it goes on to the next page.
Gender nonconforming. a broad term referring to people who do not behave in a way that conforms to the traditional expectations of their gender, or whose gender expression does not fit neatly into a category. Another definition is that, well, another meaning is that it's used to describe some people whose gender expression is different from conventional expectations of masculinity and femininity. Not all gender nonconforming people identify as transgender, and not all transgender people identify as gender nonconforming. The term should only be used if someone self-identifies as gender nonconforming. And finally, an adjective, someone whose gender identity and or gender expression does not conform to the cultural or social expectations of gender, particularly in relation to male or female. So a tomboy would be gender nonconforming in this sense, traditionally gender nonconforming.
And we did talk about in a previous show about why can a girl be a tomboy,
right,
but why can't a boy be
there's no
the same sense, but in the opposite.
Yeah, there's no
direction.
Positive word, typically no positive word to describe the opposite thing. So
our next label is genderqueer. Genderqueer people typically reject notions of static categories of gender and embrace a fluidity of gender identity and often, though not always, sexual orientation. People who identify as genderqueer may see themselves as being both male and female, neither male nor female, or as falling completely outside these categories. A person whose gender identity and or gender expression falls outside of the dominant societal norm for their assigned sex is beyond genders or is some combination of them.
all right, heterosexual. Adjective like heterosexual people. It's used to describe people whose enduring physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction is to people of the opposite sex.
Homosexual, a term that is frowned upon today. It's considered derogatory and offensive, but it is an outdated term to describe a sexual orientation in which a person feels physically and emotionally and probably romantically attracted to people of the same gender.
So instead of homosexual, now we tend to use gay and lesbian.
Yes.
All right. So nothing in there?
Correct.
So non-binary and or genderqueer describes a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or woman. Non-binary people may identify as being both a man or woman, somewhere in between, or as falling completely outside these categories. While many also identify as transgender, not all but non-binary people do. It is also defined as a gender identity that embraces the full universe of expressions and ways of being that resonate with that individual. It may be an active resistance to binary gender expectations and or an intentional creation of new unbounded ideas of self within the world. And this, I just wanted to point out too that non-binary is different than agender, because agender experiences no gender, non-binary experiences either or in between, that type of thing.
Next term was the one we've talked about before, intersex. It's defined as, in some capacity, an umbrella term describing people born with reproductive or sexual anatomy and or a chromosome pattern that can't be classified as typically male or female, or I should add to that some people who are intersex may identify with the gender assigned to them at birth, while many others do not.
All right. Lesbian, a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Some lesbians may prefer to identify as gay or as gay women.
Okay. Neutroy, an umbrella term used for people who do not identify as either a man or a woman. Agender, gender fluid, non-binary, and genderless people may also identify as neutroy. The next one is pangender, a non-binary gender identity referring to people who experience all gender identities either simultaneously or over time.
Pansexual. This describes someone who has the potential for emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to people of any gender, though not necessarily simultaneously, in the same way, or to the same degree.
And another way of saying pansexual is omnisexual. I did talk about polyamorous before, so I'm actually going to skip that term and have Elizabeth read about polygender.
All right. Polygender. Someone who has more than one gender and either experiences all of their genders at once or is moving between genders at any given time.
The next one is sapiosexual, a person who finds intelligence to be a sexually attractive quality in others. Then we touched on scoliosexual before, being primarily sexually, romantically, and or aesthetically attracted to genderqueer, transgender, or non-binary people.
Straight or heterosexual describes a sexual orientation. It's a word to describe women who are attracted to men and men who are attracted to women. This is not exclusive to those who are cisgender. For example, some transgender men identify as straight because they are attracted to women.
And the very last label, transgender. The term transgender is not indicative of gender expression, sexual orientation, hormonal makeup, physical anatomy, or how one is perceived in daily life. Many transgender people identify as gender nonconforming or queer. How transgender people choose to express their gender is individualistic, as is their transition. The last definition, used most often as an umbrella term, some commonly held definitions are someone whose gender identity or expression does not fit the dominant group social constructs of assigned birth, sex, and gender, or a gender outside of the man-woman binary, or having no gender or multiple genders. So all of this research on the label definitions stems from a drawing that I made, which I'm going to share with you now briefly, just to show you exactly the depth or the breadth of this. There it is.
It's called a mind map.
It's called a mind map. And the main topic is that says at the top says sexual self-identity. See if I can zoom in here a little bit. And I did a lot of research, but I found that really people are made up of three main parts. Their identity is a sexual identity, a gender identity, and moral identity. That does not include social identity, which is also part of your identity, but not, I didn't feel that was something that I needed to include on this. And under sexual identity, of course, you have the labels, I'll get it there, for your biological sex labels, your, oh, I have it there twice. I have it there twice, by golly. Sexual attraction, which is generally made up of an aesthetic attraction, a physical attraction, romantic, emotional, and intellectual. And you can see how some of the labels are brought out there. And the last piece of the mind map here is, of course, about gender identity. And you can see that some gender labels for cisgender people and transgender people can be the same. as in the binary woman, girl, or man, boy. That's because some transgender people, their identity is on the binary, while a lot of other transgender people are not, and can be genderqueer, gender fluid, agender, or polygender. And then there's gender expression labels, which I think we're going to talk about in just a minute. But I just wanted to share that with you. And I actually did that as an exercise to help me on my journey in finding my identity.
Yeah. So, Amari, keeping up that other drawing?
This one?
No, the other one that you have one.
Okay.
So we have talked previously about a variety of topics that comprise identity. And there's a cool drawing here that Amari's going to show, but it talks about gender expression, gender identity, orientation and attraction, and sex. And these are all different parts of you. So a lot of what Amari was just talking about have to do with the gender identity, or the, well, actually all of this, they all kind of touched on all of this because it's so interrelated. But just as a quick reminder, sex or sex assigned at birth is the label male, female, or intersex given to someone at birth based on their body parts. It's assigned by somebody else, doctors and parents. The gender identity is a person's internal sense of being a man or woman, or anything in between. You have a girl or woman, boy or man, transgender, non-binary, that type of thing. Orientation or attraction is a term to describe sexual and or romantic attractions to others. This is where you hear the terms gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, heterosexual, that type of thing. And what we're going to dive in a little bit more on today is gender expression. This is the whole of the person, what their appearance is. It's the way a person communicates their gender identity to others by the way they dress. What's that? Should I stop? I'm not quite. Okay. By the way they dress, or they act, or they refer to themselves. So in this drawing, you can see in this cute little stick figure, gender identity is in the brain. That's just basically because that's where you have your concept of what your identity is. Of course, it's totally interrelated to the whole of your body and your chromosomes and your everything. And the heart represents the orientation or attraction. Sex is usually in the genitals or secondary sex characteristics. And then your gender expression, you can see that dotted line, that is kind of
the wrapper around the person.
It's the wrapper around the person. I like that, Mike. Okay, you can stop sharing that one.
You have another one to share?
Nope.
Okay.
Not right now. So in Amari's mind map that she built, there is a section covering gender expression. And some of the expression labels are androgynous, which she defined, female, male, non-conforming, butch, femme, that type of thing. The labels that we're telling you about today are not the comprehensive, all-inclusive list. There are so many out there. There are so many people. But these are kind of the common labels. And optimally, we don't want to label ourselves. We just want to be who we are, whoever that is. But in our society, it's almost like you have to label yourself to be able to figure out who you are and who you are in relation to other people. And then hopefully we can just move past labels and just be us.
I agree.
So you want to cover that part?
Okay, what is gender expression? External manifestations of gender expressed through one's name, pronouns, clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, mannerisms, or body characteristics. Society identifies these cues as masculine and feminine although what is considered masculine and feminine changes over time and varies by culture. It is important not to assume anyone's gender by their gender expression, how they dress or wear their hair or makeup, as this helps create negative stereotypes which invalidates anyone's gender who cannot conform to society's norm.
And I would add to that you can't make assumptions on somebody's sexual orientation either because of their gender expression. Shouldn't make assumptions about people. So the way we share that we show our gender identity to the world around us, as you know, there have been traditionally, the pinks for girls and the blues for boys, and boys and girls are supposed to make the gendered choices regarding toys, colors, clothes, games, and activities. So girls whose gender expression is seen as somewhat masculine are often considered tomboys. We mentioned those earlier. Tomboys could be seen positively, neutrally, or negatively. Positive or neutral labels are harder to come by for boys whose sex and gender expression are seen as incongruent.
But in a lot of cases, when boys do express themselves in more feminine ways, they are met with derogatory terms, such as sissy or faggot. Many negative connotations or hateful words. So there's little room for boys to expand their gender expression. Girls can wear skirts or jeans, as an example. But not likewise for boys.
Not so much. For society's traditional concepts.
Right.
So the other thing, there's bias related to race, economic status, religion, and other identities, which influence responses to young people who do break out of gender constraints, or people of any age who break out of gender constraints.
Some examples of the types of gender expression would be feminine, people who have qualities or appearance traditionally associated with women. Masculine, people who have qualities or appearance traditionally associated with men. Androgynous, individuals who express themselves with a combination of masculine and feminine characteristics. And gender neutral, individuals whose gender expression is different from conventional expectations of masculinity and femininity.
Okay, right. So again, kind of talking about labels, what words do you think describe femininity? Name a few, Amari.
Soft. A warm, caring, caretaker. Emotional, weak, or at least those are societally applied labels.
So masculinity, strong, rebellious,
aggressive, competitive,
non-emotional, active, those type of things. So in reality, each of us has a little bit of all these things in it. I mean, it might be like a micron's worth, it might be like a universe's worth, but there are traditional gender stereotypes for feminine, masculine, and gender neutral or non-binary. And there's feminine traits, there's masculine traits, and there's behaviors and attitudes that are stereotypically female and stereotypically male. So somebody could have the strong feminine characteristics of what our society is known as, fearful or fussy or sensitive. They could have moderately feminine characteristics. And this is not like the be all end all definition. This is just how, it is accepted in our society traditionally. So moderately feminine might be charming or dependent or dreamy or emotional. Mildly feminine, curious, meek, nagging. Neutral might be ambitious, assertive, boastful, dominant, mildly male or masculine. It could be cruel, energetic, hard-hearted, humorous, independent.
Reckless.
Moderately could be adventurous, aggressive, forceful, loud, masculine.
You're strong.
Yeah, I don't know. My strongly masculine has fallen off the edge. I must have done a bad screen snap.
Honestly, all of this, whether we talk about what's stereotypically female or male, masculine traits and feminine traits, and traditional gender stereotypes, even in my mind, talking about them potentially shores up the idea of those stereotypes. Honestly, why couldn't a masculine trait be sensitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or sympathetic?
And a feminine trait be assertive without being aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting because just like Amari dove into the gender identity and identity labels as part of her own journey, because I'm with Amari on her journey, I also have had questions about me, and it caused me to look back over my life and figure out, or try to figure out where I fit into all this kind of stuff. I grew up as a tomboy, absolutely. But I thought, my mom was very good about, or I guess my parents were very good about not, giving me dolls and my brother trucks. Like we each got a little Volkswagen Bug model. We each had a stuffed rabbit, and so we were very gender neutral with our toys and our choices, which I think was very great of my mom.
I actually don't know your dad very well, but I picture both your dad and your mom to have been and to be very much non-forcing
Mm-hmm.
of a specific gender stereotype or gender role or gender expression on you or your brother.
And it wasn't so much that the language existed about everything we've been talking about. They just didn't want to force us into roles that were maybe limited by being your typical, female or typical male thing. And what was my other example? I had another example. It'll come back to me. But, the whole thing about a cisgender woman can be a tomboy and that's okay, but a man can't wear a dress because he thinks it feels great. Is there, I guess just so a tomboy is gender nonconforming in their dress, in their gender expression, right? Because it's not conforming to the typical feminine type of thing. It had to do with my parents again. When we went canoe camping up in the Boundary Waters, which I started when I was 6, it ended up where I would end up helping my dad cut the wood, build the fire, do that type of thing. And my brother would help my mom set up kitchen and build up air mattresses and that type of thing. So we did have all kind of mixed up things. And what I feel that did is help make my brother and me more well-rounded, more capable, less limited in just our way of thinking, in addition to the experiences that we had. So I really,
and less apt to force those stereotypes or norms on anyone else.
That's true. And as president of our PFLAG chapter, we want to change hearts by changing minds by changing hearts. We want people to be able to accept those they love that may identify as LGBTQ, because people should be able to live and be and express themselves how they are, to have the freedom to figure out who they are and the freedom to explore what that means to them. And
that comes from in a lot of cases, education. And that's what we are trying to provide for you here.
Yeah.
As much education about these topics that are not necessarily specific to the LGBTQ community. In fact, they are specific to mankind in general. Yeah. But it helps to understand the language that other people use so that we can learn to support, accept, and love them.
So it isn't easy for everybody. I mean, not everybody is just born accepting everybody for who they are. You might find out that your child or grandchild thinks they are gay, and you might have a lot of trouble with that because it's not something you ever thought about or not something you ever thought you would encounter, or because you've been taught that something like that is wrong. So there are different levels of struggle and acceptance. Education goes a long ways, because if you don't know how something works, then you make assumptions about it, and those assumptions are limited by your own knowledge base. But if we can provide education, then you understand a little bit more about something, you can make a better, more informed evaluation or decision. And for me, the ultimate bottom line, and what I saw with Amari when she came out to me as transgender, is people need to be able to be themselves. Whatever that may be, they need to be able to be themselves. And how could I ever ask Amari to squelch that in her? I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
And honestly, when I discovered I was transgender, I began my journey of self-discovery, but also realized that in some ways there were facets of Elizabeth that I didn't even know, even though we've been together for 5 years at that point.
Yeah.
So it's been an eye-opener for me to see Elizabeth on her own journey of self-discovery. And maybe it doesn't necessarily change much from the person she is right now, but it seems to me that she's thought about things that she just never had to think about before.
Absolutely. So some things that I'd leave you with that you could think about. Gender reflection. What is your gender identity today? What was your gender identity when you were in first grade? What is your gender expression today? What was your gender expression in first grade? What was your gender expression in 8th grade? What do you think your gender expression would have been considered 100 years ago? What do you think your gender identity would be 100 years from now?
I think those are all good questions that are part of the journey of self-discovery, along with probably a myriad of other questions.
Yep. So those were our 2 featured topics. We did identity labels and dived into gender expression. We always do a closing for each show. We've got another graphic we're going to put up here. With the COVID and the work from home and the socially distancing and the mask mandates, it's trying for everybody. It can be especially trying for LGBTQ people. Remember that a mental health provider is just a phone call away. If you're ever overwhelmed or have thoughts that you might harm yourself or others, there's a list here that Amari's put up as resources, suicide prevention resources. You've got the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, text, the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline, SAGE LGBT Elder Hotline, always 911 for emergencies. And then over on the right side in a sideways white box is the PFLAG Crown Point, Northwest Indiana phone number, and the LGBTQ Northwest Indiana phone number. And obviously, I mean, you know, if you call me and the question is more slated towards Amari's LGBTQ Northwest Indiana bailiwick, then, you know, we can transfer you there. So really important.
One of the things that I'm discovering as we learn how to do these TV shows more and more is that this information, whether people, oops, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. There we go. We're giving you this on the air, so to speak. You can go back and watch the videos, but I think Elizabeth and I need to and will be making an effort in the near future to make some of our TV materials available online so that people can just go to certain things like this.
Like on our website.
Right online when you're not watching the show.
And we'll have a little bit about, the script contents and the resources that we talked about, as well as we're happy to engage in conversations or discussions with you as well.
Oh, Pride announcements.
Pride announcements. So, as you know, many of the Pride events were canceled or postponed. Spencer Pride, which is way down south, but they had moved to October, and now they have just announced that they've canceled their live event and they'll be doing virtual events instead. We will be having an announcement come out hopefully within the next week about NWI Pride. And what else would you like to say about any of that?
Spencer Pride is near and dear to my heart. I love the people who've done that. They were such a great guide for us when we did our first Pride Festival last year. And really, we look at what they do and we try to emulate them where we can. And really to find out that they had, after delaying it till October, ended up finally having to cancel it is disheartening to me.
But it's a total reflection on the state of things right now. So.
Absolutely. We will be having an announcement that is Northwest Indiana Pride, NWI Pride, very soon concerning 2020 NWI Pride, which at the moment is still scheduled to go on September 12th. But look for that announcement in your email if you're on our list, on the websites, mine and
social media,
the Pride website, social media,
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter,
etc.
Yep. But thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill and Callie's show, for again producing our TV show here.
And thanks to all our viewers for tuning in and watching LGBTQ Northwest Indiana and PFLAG Crown Point NWI TV.
Yep, and we will be with you again on August 13th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Sip Coffee House 2 in Highland, Indiana on Jewett Avenue. Great coffee, lattes, smoothies, and more. Food and treats you will adore. Small town charm with big city selection. It's Sip Coffee House 2. If it's breakfast, brunch, or lunch you need, Les Cafe is the place to go, indeed. Open 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. 7 days a week. Les Cafe Pancake House, located in Highland, Indiana on Highway Avenue. Les Cafe, where less is more. Promise You Art House, a fun and vibrant place for local artisans to display and sell their creative works, owned and operated by artists for artists. Conveniently located at 8830 Kennedy Avenue in Highland, Indiana. For hours and events, visit pyarthouse.com or follow them on Facebook. Promise You Art House, where creativity reigns.